Just turn it on. That's not sure.
Testing. That's great. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'd just like to check with the IT specialist. Are we okay with the virtual? Yes. Here we are? Yeah. Great stuff. Thanks very much. Once again, welcome everybody to the wonderful 𝐒𝐡𝐚 auditorium. Really appreciate you being here today. I'd just like to say a couple of words before we introduce our speaker. Firstly, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Western Cape Medical Devices Cluster. This is a specific industry association that was formed back in about 2017, 28 here in the Western Cape, with the support from the Department of Trade and Industry, Westgrow, and a couple of others. And it gives me great pleasure to see founding members in the audience this morning. Shona MacDonald is here with us, and it is an association that is based on collaboration, teamwork, information sharing. And the fundamentals of the cluster, which was funded by the DTI back then, was to assist up-and-coming small micro enterprises in becoming compliant with the necessary regulations in the medical devices sector. That was one of the fundamental objectives of the cluster. To date, we have a lot of success stories. And if you look on our website, you'll see some of those companies that are represented. I think one of the challenges that the industry is facing at this moment in time is that the healthcare sector, the whole environment in South Africa, is at a nexus point. If one considers national health insurance, if one considers universal health care, if one considers what took place in Parliament yesterday regarding budgets and so forth, this is a time to be concerned. And yet, amongst all of that, there is such an optimistic feeling amongst many of the local manufacturers in South Africa. And the reason for that optimism is really down to the Health Products Master Plan. I use the word Health Products Master Plan because that is what government started out about, well, in 2021, when a group of individuals was tasked to put together a master plan, in the same way that there's a sugar master plan and a motor master plan and so forth. And a gentleman by the name of Vic Van Vuuren was tasked with putting together that master plan to put to government. Government accepted that master plan in, I think, 2024, and they then set out to seek a project manager to implement the master plan. Vic is with us here today, and it gives me great pleasure to tell you something about Vic. And it's no mean feat that Vic is a well-traveled person and has many, many things on his agenda, one of which is working with government and certainly being very close to those politicians that make the decisions. So the Western Cape Medical Devices Cluster is one of the industry associations that is funding the project manager's role. So it's a 2-year role, and together with Medical Device Manufacturers of South Africa, the South African MedTech Industry Association, and other bodies, we have contributed approximately 50% of the funds to remunerate the project manager. I'd like to call upon Vic to give us his overview and how he plans to implement the strategy. Over to you, Vic. You need it.
Oh, we have people online. Oh, you got people online. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and share. Yep.
Good morning, everyone. I think I want to take it up and just explain where this master plan concept came from, as Lindsay said. But those of you who know the politicians out there from many years ago, when the Constitution was drafted, it was 𝐒𝐻𝐚, who came from the old National Party representing F.W. de Klerk, and Cyril Ramaphosa representing the ANC. And they got down with their teams and drafted the Constitution. Why that is relevant, there was a relationship that was built very strongly between 𝐒𝐻𝐚 and the president at that time. And then we move on. And in comes eventually President Jacob Zuma. And the economy at the time of the presidency of Jacob Zuma didn't go too well. And the confidence of the private sector in what government was doing was really at a low ebb. And so what happened was 𝐻𝐻 went up to the president when he got into power the first time of his office and said, listen, there's this impasse. Now, what 𝐻𝐻 had done in the meantime is he set up an organization called ITI, International Transformation Initiative. And him and Mohammed Baba, who's also a politician, and 𝐈𝐧𝐬𝐢𝐵𝐿𝐻 went around the world showcasing how South Africa came through from apartheid to through into a democracy. And they went to places like, they did a lot of work in Gaza, which obviously didn't work at the end, the way things turned out there. But they were in Syria, they were in Venezuela, they went to all the hotspots, and they were funded to speak there. But when 𝐻𝐻 went to the president, he said, we need to sort this out. So the president said, well, give me an idea, give me a plan. And so they discussed and came up with the concept of dividing the country into 26 economic zones. And they would work then with facilitators to draft master plans which would bring about growth in each of those sectors, the sugar, the steel, the automotive, and so on. But that went on for a number of years, but there were a number of sectors or industries that were left off the map of those 26 that were dedicated. Plastics hasn't been done yet. The pharmaceuticals hasn't been done yet. MedTech was one that was not done. So when I came back from my stint at the UN in end of 2022, they asked me to get involved in the MedTech industry because I used to head up BUSA, Business Unity South Africa. So I used to work with all the different sectors. And that was to my advantage of understanding the dynamics. And so we started working on, in 22, going into 23, it was actually in 23, the negotiation of a master plan, which involved the private sector organizations, Western Cape Cluster, the MDMSA, SALDA, and SAMED. Those are the four employer groups. The trade unions were involved through 𝐒𝐡𝐚 and to a lesser extent Solidarity, but they were not big players because this is not a highly unionized industry. They're there, but they're not, it's not like the mining sector, which is labor intensive, and the other sectors. So 𝐒𝐡𝐚 through Tengela has been involved all along the way. And then you've got the government departments. And that's been the most difficult thing of all, is the government departments are all important, but they don't speak to each other. And so what you've got is the hardest part of drafting a master plan was trying to do deals between government departments rather than between government and the private sector. And so you've got the NDOH, who are just missing in action, the Department of Health. But the driver behind this process for the medtech industry was the DTIC through Minister Ebrahim Patel. And he was the custodian at the time of his office of the MedTech Masterplan. And then you've got like the DSI, Department for Science and Innovation, and you've got other departments that were also relevant along the way. But the key driver was the DTIC, and then we sucked in the NDOH to come on board, and the NHI as part of the NDOH through Nicholas Crisp. And so we got this plan, and I think it was in April, May last year, it was signed. The sad part is that, typical to South Africa, we draft these plans, and when it comes to implementation, we're missing in action. And so the plan just lay there for the rest of 2024. They asked for people, they put out a tender of people interested in implementing the plan. And obviously, I enjoyed getting to know this industry. I put my name in the hat. And then they said, look, would you do it? And once again, we went for a whole lot of months until I started on the 3rd of February as the project manager for the implementation of this master plan. So what does it mean now as we go forward? When I examined the other master plans, most of them have got stuck. So if you look at the master plans and you look at them, many of them have got stuck. Why? Because I looked at their structures of how they're trying to implement, and it's so bureaucratic. So the first thing they've got is an EOC, an Executive Oversight Committee, which is usually chaired by the minister of that sector. And then the minister's diary is horrific. So although the intentions are good, that oversight committee was supposed to meet, let's say, every 3 months. They just never met. And so that was a stumbling block. Then there were steering committees, and also who chairs a steering committee? They usually put in the DG of that particular government department. Once again, the DG's diary was so full running around with the minister that those meetings never took place. And so when I looked at those sectors, I found that the downfall was in the process and the structures. And so when we look at the MedTech, I'm trying to craft something very simple. So there's going to be a steering committee meeting, the first one on Monday. And the way we've got it is there's just 3 government departments. And there'll be 4 employers and 1 trade union. That's going to be the steering committee. Each person will have an alternate. So the Western Cape cluster through Lindsay will have a seat on Monday's meeting on the steering committee. There's an alternate person, but that person only comes in when the primary member is not there. You can attend as observers, but there's only 1 spokesperson. The government departments are the trade and industry, DTIC, the NDOH, that's health, and MEDIC, which is here in the Western Cape, which is a government institution that specializes in the area of MedTech. That's the 3, those are the 3 government guys, the 4 employers and 1 trade union. I've tried to structure the process that there's no voting and outvoting and that. To try and negate voting, I've built in a structure of 9 votes out of 12. I think we gave 4 votes to each group, sorry. Even though there's 3 government members, they got 4 votes. The employers have got 4 votes, and the workers have had 4 votes. But the votings I've made actually superfluous because I said you have to have a majority of 9 out of 12 votes to succeed to get something that is contested through. That means that nobody can veto or outvote another one. The way to go forward, in my experience, and I worked in many countries overseas on enterprise development, is that you don't want to get to a point where you've got an impasse and you have to vote. You've got to avoid that. And if there's no process of voting, you talk until you've got a resolution and you move. And so we want to move on the basis of consensus and joint initiatives. There's no contentious areas here. There are areas that are problematic that we need to get through, like the whole regulatory framework environment is problematic. How do we get through that? And when I look at the history between the private sector and SAHPRA and that, it's just a continual headbanging. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So the steering committee will provide guidance to 4 subcommittees. Now, if you look at the master plan is divided into 4 pillars. The first pillar is the regulatory framework and the enabling environment. How do we create an enabling environment for the manufacturing sector to grow? That's the bottom line. How do we get Africa into the game where we can access the African market? Because it's difficult. So like Europe, when they set up and they get their CE mark to register a product and certify their products, they are able to then go across all the European Union countries without having to register and prove in each country. What do we do in Africa? We shoot ourselves in the foot. If you want to go to Botswana, you've got to register and get certified there. If you want to go to Ghana and go to anywhere you go, you've got to repeat the process and it costs you. Why can't we do like the European Union, where if you're registered in a country, there's a common standard and we move forward? Now, South Africa's got the advantage that when we're talking about manufacturing and the MedTech industry, we're by far the biggest. There's no one to match us in Africa in terms of what we've got, from innovation, from implementation, from the multinationals that are here. And so if we can work, starting with the SADC countries and get some commonality there, that we can move around without having to go through these bureaucratic processes, that's going to give us the volume that we require. To be successful in South Africa on a huge scale, we don't have the volumes. And so we've got to find how we can increase the volumes and get access to markets that we're not getting into. So the one way is to hit the African market. And the overseas guys don't know the African market like we do. And so if we can get the regulatory framework sorted out, we've got a competitive advantage. Those are the kind of things we're going to look at in the regulatory framework. We need to look at certification, registration, the fees that they want to put into place. So when I was at the IDC the other day on a platform, I had met for the first time Griselda, and I forget her surname. She's the operation manager at SAHPRA. And I always dealt with 𝐒𝐚𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻, who's one of the ladies working there. But it's whenever I started speaking to them at the beginning of drafting the plan, I met with a lot of resistance. Them saying to me, we're here to protect the safety of the patient, not to look at growing the market. You've got to go and grow the market. I said, but we can't grow the market unless you guys come to the party and make an enabling environment that is conducive to growing the industry. And we started dialogue, and eventually we've got to the point from a personal and personality point of view where we're starting to understand each other. So I needed to understand what are their challenges. So I sat down with Griselda at lunchtime and I said, what are the challenges you're facing? Why do you want to put these fees in that are going to hit the industry so hard? She said, well, government have cut our budgets. They've cut our budgets and they've told us they're going to be a further 10 million cut of our budgets. And they told us we need to find self-funding. Where do we get funding to run our institution? Well, we're going to have to put our fees onto the private sector. And I said, well, before you do that, can we talk? Because there's various models internationally that lend themselves to a regulatory environment and an institution without putting the burden onto your private sector manufacturers. So that's where we've got to go now. And that's part of the discussion that's going to have to happen in the regulatory space. How do we do certification? When are they going to bring registration in? And how is it going to work? How are we going to increase the skills capacity of that SAHPRA office? How are we going to bring in a law that governs the medtech industry and not get lumped on Act 101 behind a pharmaceutical industry? If you read Act 101, it's a pharmaceutical act, and at the end they chucked in medtech. Doesn't make sense. So we've got to start the dialogue now on short-term, medium-term, and long-term stuff in the regulatory framework to say, let's start getting the lawyers together to talk about an act for medtech, looking at the Irish model in a few of these successful countries in the medtech industry. And while we're doing that, let's start hit these blockages that are preventing you from doing your job while you're sitting around trying to get certificates and stuff through the ports and things like that. That's what we've got to focus on. So that's the regulatory framework. Now, the steering committee is going to have these 4 committees. The subcommittees, like the regulatory framework, will be populated with experts in the regulatory space. So we want people who understand that from the private sector, from the government. SAHPRA must be there, the SABS must be there, and so on. And then we'll identify what we can achieve and work together. That's the idea. It's not going to be easy. So let's move on to, but what I do understand is the important role of SAHPRA. And what we've got to do is work with SAHPRA to build SAHPRA. I mean, I mentioned 𝐒𝐚𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻 and Griselda. When you understand their challenges, you start understanding some of the ways that they're functioning. We've got to work with them to try and improve that. What we need to do is get more experts in. Example of a challenge we had recently, CSIR developed a scanner for pregnant women. Now, if you look at the normal thing, the woman will go into the hospital or to a clinic and they've got a radiologist who does the scanning, they check the babies are right. But for a country with large rural areas, it's difficult. So they've got a new innovation where they've got the scanner that a nurse in a clinic in the rural area can use that detects any problems on a child in the womb. And that's something great. But when they went to SAHPRA to certify that product to get to the market, SAHPRA said, sorry, we don't have the skills to determine whether that's safe for the patient or not. And therefore, we're not going to sign it off. So take it to the US or to Europe and get it certified there. What does that cost? It costs a fortune. They're busy doing that, but it's time consuming and it's a cost. Had SAHPRA had the skill set to adjudicate on that instrument, it could already be in the market and being exported for that matter. Lots of challenges that we've got to deal with, but it's one where we've got to work together rather than pointing fingers. And that's going to be the way forward. The second pillar is around market growth. So probably the someone's got their mic on, but I think they've been muted. I thought maybe it's an applause for my speech, but it's a bit premature. So the market growth one, what are some of the things that stick out there? Well, it's access to markets, yes, access to Africa. How do we export? How do we get level playing fields? Why is it that we're part of BRICS and China can just bring in their products here, no hang-ups whatsoever? We want to go to China, you've got to do clinical trials in China, you've got to pay huge fees to get in there, and then you can export. They don't have to do that here. Why? Why do we allow that? How do we protect our own industry? How do we look at the procurement process? If I had my way looking at the models, I mean, Brazil just went in gung-ho and said, right, all imports are banned unless you can prove that we can't do it locally. Now we should have a procurement bill here that says, if you want to bring in medical products, first go to the local market and be satisfied that you can't get it locally. Now, obviously, cost is the big factor here, because you can get it locally sometimes at double the price. That's not going to work. So we've got to look at costing, but somehow we need to get the government and the private sector to consider getting products locally. I go to one company in Midrand. They manufacture gowns and operating theatre gowns and gloves and stuff. And then I find they put packs together for the surgeons. And in the pack is surgical tools. And they import 300,000 a month from Pakistan of these scalpels and whatever they do. And then I go down the road in Port Elizabeth and I find a company there that's manufacturing the same products. And the one didn't even know about the other one. Now, whether it was viable or not, I just put them in touch. But there seems to be a lack of knowledge and data, and I'll come to that in the fourth pillar, of who's doing what. So in the second column, we want to go to the hospital groups, and I already started discussions with them to say, what is it that you are procuring that you think can be manufactured locally? Starting with category A, category D is a bit more technical because of the difference in the technical side. But let's see what we can manufacture, and let's put it out to tender. Tender, big problem. Why? Because if you look at the tender process for pharmaceuticals, it goes to Kadila Jamaluddin at the Department of Health. She runs a good ship there. There you go and check. If someone's putting in a tender for medicines they want to provide, they go to the MedTech industry, to the pharmaceutical companies. They go and check. What are they doing? How are they manufacturing? Is it quality? Is it safe? Do all the checks, and then they award a tender. What happens in the MedTech industry, they don't do it through Department of Health. It goes through the Treasury. Treasury doesn't know about medical industry, so they put the tenders out. Tenders come in. They haven't got the capacity to go and check who's doing what where. So what happens is a guy in Durban, and this is what I found out, he buys bandages off the shelf from someone who manufactures it locally at high quality, and goes to Clicks or wherever in a pharmacy and buys these bandages, takes the wrapping off, repackages it in his wrapping, takes it and shows the quality of his product, which is then certified, and says, this is what I'm doing. He wins the tender because he comes in at a low cost. He then brings in a container load of substandard products, which are much cheaper, and it hits the hospital market. What happens to the local manufacturer who's providing it? They close down. They close down that part of their manufacturing. No one's checking the quality and where these foreign products are coming in. There's no checks and balances. And the tender guys who are awarding it just said, we don't have the capacity to go and check, so we go on face value. Now, that's a disaster. So that's one area we've got to go and fix up quickly. And that's an area where we start protecting localization and local manufacturing. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's a very key component. The whole procurement process needs to be relooked at. I would go so far as to say we should have that preferential procurement that you can only import if you can prove there's no local products that are competitive. And I use the word competitive because you can't just stick your prices up and say I manufacture locally and coming in at double the cost. Not going to work. Another one in that market growth area, sprocket growth. And I just had a chat to another group of employers, is the failure of government to pay their bills. The hospitals are not paying. There's over 3 billion rand worth of outstanding debts to local manufacturers and to suppliers. It goes both international and local. And the hospitals aren't paying, but they want the products. They're just not paying their debt. And so we've got to go and talk at the Treasury and at the provincial level. You speak at the Department of Health, they say it's a provincial thing, it's be decentralized. So you've got to go down hospital by hospital to say, why aren't you paying your bills? And say, we don't have the money. Well, you can't get products if you're not going to pay. It's just going to drive somewhere. So the second one is going to be very innovative ways of finding how to grow the market. How do we do trade agreements? How do we get the SADCs on board? How do we look at the local manufacturing? Where do we get funding if we can get the local manufacturers to increase? So we had a discussion with the German donors called the 𝐻𝐝𝐻𝐿. They've got money they're prepared to put in. This afternoon, I'm meeting with the new CEO of the Localization Support Fund. They've got money to put in. So part of my job is going to find the funding sources for those industries that want to grow, the IDC. So our local funding options are bad news. I worked on projects, on catalytic projects in the one province where they asked us to work with the local government. Sorry, I must watch my tongue. You'll just come in and go 5 minutes and I'll wrap up quickly. Because I can talk forever.
You're fine.
I'm okay still. So what happened is we developed a whole lot of catalytic projects in line with what the government wants. Like in Mpumalanga, all these farms that were taken or bought from the old farmers and given to emerging farmers who didn't know how to farm. So all these farms are standing there unproductive. How do we get them to be productive? So we work with the existing farmers and the new farmers, and we develop a process of them becoming productive and generating produce. But we need funding for that. So we go to the IDC, we go to the JET Fund, we go to all these funds. And they all say, we've got money, come talk to us. Well, 6 months after talking and going backwards and forwards and looking at 1,000 forms, they gave me 10,000 reasons why they can't fund our programs. That goes through every single sector in this country that are battling to get funding out of that. There are funds awarded, but it's so difficult. And the guys that get the funding are those that really don't need it because they can provide collateral. Now, if they all can provide collateral, how do we get the new entrants into the market who don't have collateral? There's got to be some risk taking out there. And so that's an area to look at. How do we identify funding that we can bring in for the manufacturers to grow? The other thing is I looked at all the factories I've been to, and I've been to many, are all running under capacity, 70%, 60%, 50%. I haven't found one that's running over capacity or battling. That means we've got the capacity to manufacture for the local market, the numbers we need. So market growth. The third pillar is skills. What I was pleasantly surprised with when I looked through the industry, there isn't a shortage of skills in the medtech industry at the moment. I went to very sophisticated factories. A good example is Malanda Villiers in Southern Medical up in 𝐼𝐻𝐿𝐼, producing highly sophisticated stuff there. Discs for backs and all sorts, and creams that they've got biochemists there dealing with creams that come from the rooibos tree that are exported to China. He's one of the few guys that exports to China for burns. But the people working there, engineers, biochemists, you name it, very technical guys, all come from local universities. And it's male, female, black, white, it's very diverse. And he said to me, Vic, I don't have a problem with skills. My problem is the regulatory environment and market access. So 80% or 90% of his products are exported. Give you example, he manufactures at cost screws and discs for your back. So I've got a friend down in Durban, a judge who has a back operation, and he hears I'm doing this work. He says, Vic, why is my bill so high? and look on his bill, and there's one item that stands out, the screw that was in his back, 80,000 rand. So we said, fine, let's go and check that out. Where did you get it from? It came from the US. Why did the surgeon get it from the US? Can't we give it locally? I found 4 companies that can do the exact same product locally for 30,000 rand. Why did it come from overseas? All I can deduce from this is that the person who made the choice is getting a trip to the US to a seminar every year with his family, and he's got brand loyalty. Simple as that. How do we change that mindset to become loyal to your own country and move away from that? Those are things we've got to work on now. So I'm finding all these different little angles that if we can stop that, we can start bringing a lot more to the table from local manufacturing. So the skill set, I've digressed there, is that we need to make sure that if we do grow the industry and there's a demand for technical expertise, that we can provide that through universities, not just UCT and maybe WITS. We've got to go to the broader universities out there to get into the faculties, the skill set that we're going to require. The one area there was a shortage is in the regulatory framework, because when you talk medtech, you're talking of chemists and engineers and you name it. But when it comes to the regulatory framework, there's very few who understand it about that and how to do it. That's an area we need to look at. The last pillar is one of data collection, research, and innovation. And we've got pockets of excellence there, but because we can't get into the markets, it's so difficult. I mentioned that scanning instrument, because they have to go to FTE and CE mark to get registered. It costs so much money to do that. And the small companies can't do it. The innovators can't do it. And so we've got to find a way of getting that innovation locally. What I found with Malanda Villiers, he showed me a disc that he had developed in his factory or with his engineers that was unique. Normally you put screws in the back with the vertebra because you can't cut the spinal cord, but he's got a disc that goes around the spine and they jack it up on the sides and it opens up and opens it. That's the way I understood it. He patented it. He's captured I think the US market and the European market because he's innovation, but he was in a way had the ability to take a CE mark and an FDE, whereas other guys can't do that because they don't have the means. What is the way forward now? Monday we'll have a steering committee, the first steering committee, and then in March we're going to have the 4 subcommittees that will meet. And we're going to look to the membership of Western Cape, MDMSA, SALDA, and SAMED to give us experts from amongst you that are prepared to sit on these subcommittees and then identify priorities and blockages that can be taken on. We look at timelines, and then we start working with the appropriate persons, whether it means with government, whether it means with the trade desks, with the treasury, with SARS. Once we identify, we start. My job is going to be to keep the energy levels going and to drive that process. I'm a negotiator. You give me the stuff, I'll go negotiate. But what I don't understand, and I see one of the speakers here today, I listened to him speaking the other day. Who's our third speaker?
Mark.
No, not Mark. There was another name, or someone else's name I saw there. Mladen, yes. He's in Mladen, yeah. Yes, I listened to you on your seminar with the engineers the other day. It's like listening to Greek, from a technical point of view. I find that it's a different world, the medtech industry. It's like when I worked in Sanlam, the actuaries are there. I mean, they talk a different language. The medtech guys, when they start talking technical stuff like the diagnostics, I get lost because it's just not my comfort zone. But what I do once I grasp and understand it, we've got to go in and make these things happen. And that's what my role is going to be. I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions. I've tried to do it very quickly.
Thanks, Vic. That was really informative. I think this is the man for the job. I'm glad that you were selected by the DTI to do this and TIPS, because this is going to be I think a 2-year job.
Yes, well, it's 2 years plus, but they're starting with 2 years.
2 years plus. Any questions for Vic, please? No? Yes, here we have a question. Debbie.
well done. You're getting down on again all the issues and now it's actually playing out more this week. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, another founding member of the Western Cape Medical Devices Cluster, TITAMED.
And my work partner Marlene is at the back there. Marlene, stick your hand up. Marlene is with me in my little company, but she's in the Western Cape, and I'm moving down in June. I haven't even told the guys to tell you.
Welcome.
Well,
They're
I
all
took the-
online.
I took the advantage of coming down to find a specialist, but it's all online these days, so doesn't matter where I am.
True. There's a question, Shona.
Yeah, but I had one question. Have you considered the challenges of donated medtech into not only South Africa but Africa and the implications of that as well?
That specific item now. And if it is an issue, we need to put it on the table. I mean, what I found is that with the DTIC and the wealth of knowledge there, I usually go to Swasti and Saudi, and they would inform me of what's going on, and like the likes of yourself. But that hasn't come up with me yet, no. And if it is an issue, it needs to be put into one of these subcommittees.
Yes.
Ruwena Sheikh, previously from Zambia, the independent. I just wanted to ask, on the steering committee, will Treasury be represented as well? Because the Treasury is actually the person looking, I mean, the where all of the tenders come from. Shouldn't we be interacting with them? The issue is that they, like you said, don't have an understanding of the sector. So they don't even include regulatory requirements into the actual tender spec. And in addition to that, there should be preference for local manufacturers, which is clearly stated in order for us to grow this industry. And this discussion has been happening for years. Swasti, I mean, we've been having this discussion for more than 15 years, actually. So, I think my question is, the biggest hurdle that we've always faced is the interaction between the government departments. And I think Treasury needs to be represented on the steercom. I think it would add value.
Right, that has been raised a number of times, but we've chosen not to put them on steercom, but to involve them in the subcommittees and also to meet directly with them, because we find that they don't have the time and space to go to the steering committees, because if they come onto our steering committee, they're going to have to be on 26 sector steering committees, because they're so key to all of the sectors across there. So what we've done is I've had meetings with the Treasury, and they were very receptive and very helpful. I mean, I can't blame them for the way they handle the tender process, because they're undercapacitated. And so we've got to find a way. It's the same as SAHPRA. I mean, SAHPRA plays such a key role out there. We've got to find ways of working with SAHPRA to help SAHPRA to get the enabling space there. And the same with Treasury. So we will be engaging with them. We will be inviting them to the specific meetings where it's relevant, but we don't want to take up their time to sit on all the meetings where they only have a small part to play on an item.
If I may just add, with my cluster hat on, the Western Cape Department of Health puts in all of their tenders that the product, the company needs to have an ISO 13485, and you have to also submit your SAHPRA license. So there is a level of quality and regulatory put into the Western Cape, but I agree, it needs to be, nationally done. We have a question online. Can we see it there?
Oh, I don't have my glasses on.
Question. In South Africa, there's a dearth of quality according to MDR EU training, specifically quality and medical device software. Tech universities need to start with post-grad diplomas. Dave Thorne, director at Vivatum.
I agree.
Yep.
I mean, the one area, not only do we looking at, we've got to look at digitization of the industry, and the processes that we're using to do the administrative side of the medtech industry is archaic. I mean, starting with the regulator and all over the place, we need to get up to speed with the modernizing that. But in terms of the qualifications, yes, I think that's a very good point.
Thank you very much. Another question, Maladen.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that the MDA for missing in action. So 20 years ago, they published the framework for health technology policies. with health innovation, health technology innovation as one pillar. And then 5 years later, they introduced the health technology strategy again with health technology innovation as one of the pillars. In 20 years, there's been no kind of follow-up at all, never mind an integrated follow-up. So that I think is a disconnect that also needs to be addressed.
Thank you. The biggest challenge we've got excellent skills in this country. We've got excellent in the government departments. If you go there, you find, I mean, I sat with 𝐒𝐤𝐻𝐻𝐿𝐻, she was amazing. And she took me through the whole process, but we're not coordinating and we're not implementing together. We work at different angles. So for me, the key process of this implementation is to do exactly that, is to start bringing together and integrating what we've got and the good work, not to reinvent the wheel. We've got good plans out there. How do we implement them? And the master plan is not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's just putting down 4 pillars and saying, these are the key areas we've got to address. So I agree with you. We've got to use what we've put out there and the work that's been done, but to make it happen now, we just don't make it happen.
Magda from Sanofi.
And one of those requirements are research, clinical evaluation and research. The challenge we in South Africa have is if you want to regulate your clinical or your device, you have to prove clinically your device is safe and it performs in the way it's supposed to do. The challenge is the research part. We as industry doesn't have access to the universities to do that research. And when you go to the university, they ask you for ethical approval and they ask you for guidance permission. So you go to the university, they ask for National Department of Health to give you that guide people to do research on the patient, and then I'll just asking you for the ethical approval. So you are completely in the because you can't get the ethical approval and you can't get the ethics the gatekeeper permission as well. So what we found last week on that's the first one. The second one is the funding. When you talk to a researcher, the only interest I have is how much is it the company going to pay them to do that research. So I think when we get funding opportunities, it's important also to unlock funding for research. Because we have to prove that we can the output of the site. And it performs what it needs to do. So I'm looking forward to see how the move of software CE research is going to play along, because that is the most important part of us proving without our device science. And then just on the market opportunities, it's actually not there. There is a working group that is working on the Article 2 and the Article 253. And they are represented from all the provinces. The challenge there is that they don't have the technical skills and expertise to decide what product is the best product. And they don't realize that industry as well. So you get surprised when the tender specification is established, because industry are never invited to give any input in whether that advice is applicable or not. Industry is never consulted what's the product likely available now. So I think that is the gap is happening. The National Treasury is doing their best to just facilitate and oversee this whole process. I think working group is from medical device in provinces, and they have that skills. So I think that is the gap that we need to address with clinical devices. And then also the motivation for new products. If you come with innovative, like this guy next to me, that would be fantastic new product. But to get this product available in South Africa, you have to come and think. We have one product that's motivated 6 years. We've got more than 150 doctors that motivated for this product to be on failure. And every time it was disregarded because they don't include new specifications for new products in the current specification. So as we as industry want to run or serve the needs of the patients in this country, we have to have access to tender specifications and
whether the product is locally available.
Thank you. You can be on committee 4 as well. So
You've just got a job.
in the tender process, the Treasury went out at one stage, because we're talking volumes, companies need volumes, and they awarded a tender, I think it was for condoms. And it was a huge tender, but that whole business went belly up. So when I spoke to Treasury, they put out a tender, let's say for 100,000 units, whatever, and they, instead of giving it to 1 or 2 companies to make it viable, they divided across 7. And for one company to get 1/7 of that isn't adequate enough to make a viable business, but they'll take it, but then they fold. And so the Treasury were worried about the risk factor, but we've got to work on that to find a way forward, because you need to have volumes in a company to make it viable. And the tender process has got to understand that. So yes.
I think the other problem with the National Treasury is their preferential point system. They allocate 90 points out of 100 for price and 10 points for BEE and local manufacturing. So I think that is skewing the market and certainly detrimental and a barrier to local manufacturers. So that's something the Treasury needs to address.
There's a new procurement bill that's gone quite far, and I'm not sure how far it is for implementation, but it gives a lot more leeway. So it talks about you can change that dynamic from 90-10 to 60-40 in different sectors. But I need to find out how far that procurement bill was. It was going almost to the end of the sign-off process. I need to find out when it's going to be implemented. And that will be key to exactly what you're saying, where it gives us more leeway to give attention to localization, to Black economic empowerment, and all those kind of things will get points. Whereas now, 90% cost, the 10% spread along the rest, you've got no chance. Cost is going to drive every single thing. And the other countries don't have that. So when Ireland started their medtech industry, they favored their local producers. Now they can go more, across and work on cost a lot more because they've leveled the playing fields. But for us to kickstart this in a way that's going to be meaningful, we need to start favoring localization. And we've got to get some preferences in there. And it comes in the trade agreements. We've got to start putting some pressure on trade agreements and not allowing guys to come play here without, and we're not allowed to play there.
Aladdin?
No, just to comment on that, Vic. So I think one of the difficulties is focus on purchase price. The purchase price, especially for equipment, is just the tip of the iceberg. One really needs to look at the life cycle, the lifetime cost of ownership. And so to the extent that we focus just on the purchase price, we know the Afrikaans saying quick with these good. You can buy something cheap, and when it breaks down within a year. So one needs to look at what happens downstream once you acquire the product. And so there's the opportunity to create a package that goes beyond just the tip of the iceberg purchase price.
I went to a factory in Randburg last week. They do 3D printing on titanium and aluminium for shoulder parts and knees and all that. It was amazing what these guys do. So they customize it for each patient. I mean, this is way when I'm bionic body this side from all my sport, and I've got an artificial hip. When I went in, they look at 4 sizes on the shelf, and they find the one that's closest to you, and then they just bang it into shape in your body, and you've got to put up with it. Now these guys print it so that the operation time goes down from 4 hours to like an hour because it's customized for your body. They just take out and put in. They don't have to bash it around. I said, but your costs, they said, we're coming in cheaper than any imported stuff. And I said, what are you running at capacity-wise? 75%. I said, why aren't the guys using you? He says, they just don't use us. And the quality tops, the cost is tops. We've got to address that.
Thank you very much, Vic. I really appreciate it. Round of applause for Vic. Oh, we have one more question. Thanks very much. Sorry about that. In the next 10 years, if medical devices industry is set up as per the master plan, how many jobs can be created in this sector? Thank you very much, Neha.
We're not going to look at massive job creation in the sector because it's a very niche market. So if we're looking at 1,000 jobs in the next 3 years, we're talking good. So I talk 10,000, maybe 20, 10 years, maybe 15,000, maybe 20,000. But we're not talking massive numbers of job creation. It's going to be job creation, but it's economic growth that we're looking at. The economic growth will have a lot of spin-offs for other areas. So the industry itself will be creating jobs, but it's not going to be a massive job creator. But it will still add to, obviously, to the important things in the country.
Thanks very much, Victor. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Thanks very much indeed. When Vic was talking about bones and plates and things like that, it reminded me of being taught at school about having 206 bones in your body. And nowadays, when I get out of bed every morning, I can hear them. Great. Our next presenter is Professor Sudesh Sivarasu. And I'd like to just give you an overview of Sudesh's bio. Sudesh is the DSI NRF South African Research Chair in Biomedical Engineering Innovation and a leading figure in biomedical engineering at the University of Cape Town. He serves as the director of UCT's Biomedical Engineering Research Centre and heads UCT MedTech. Prof. Sivarasu is also a professor and head of biomedical engineering in the Department of Human Biology at UCT and holds an adjunct position as international professor in global health and technology at Northwestern University, Chicago. Sudesh is renowned for his prolific contributions to medical innovation. He is recognized as UCT's second most active inventor, holding currently 66 patent applications across 21 patent families, with 27 patents granted in jurisdictions including the US, the UK, EU, South Africa, and India. With a strong focus on developing appropriate health technologies for low resource settings, Prof. Sivarasu research spans medical device innovation, orthopedic biomechanics, and technology translation. He has supervised 56 students to completion, including 7 PhD, 40 MSc, and 9 honors graduates, and is currently supervising 18 students, comprising 8 PhD and 10 MSc candidates. I think with that introduction, I don't need to say any more. I'm handing over to Prof. Sivarasu.
Thank you, Lindsay. Really appreciate the effort in going through the introductions.
By the way, just to announce, if I may, Prof. Sudesh has been really good in organizing today's event with his PA, 𝐒𝐚𝐻𝐿𝐴. Really appreciate the fact that they have assisted the cluster in providing the venue today, the teas and the coffees and so forth. And he's also been more generous and invited all of us to lunch today. So thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Lindsay. So finally, it took me to figure out what it takes to share virtually. So you can see it outlined. So there are some engineers who are still holding on to their skills. Coming to your point, Vic, we need skills development, right? But that also showcases, what will happen to an academic life without a PPT. Vic could speak for 45 minutes without any notes or any presentation, but me, not even a minute. So that's a typical academic. So by the way, my name is Sudesh Sivarasu. Thanks, Lindsay, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm going to run through some key challenges and some key learnings that we have gotten in our process of translating our MedTech innovation. And, I always will show these slides because you're in UCT, you should know these great stalwarts, starting with Chris Bernard and our 2 Nobel Prize winners, 𝐼𝐧𝐬𝐢𝐴𝐻𝐿𝐴 and Sir Aaron Clark. I had the old artifact of the CT scanner, which I didn't know it was the replica of the original CT scanner model that is currently in Smithsonian's. And Miladen helped me identify that. And now that's been put in our departmental display. So it's a treasure that we are holding. So CT scanners is now a common health technology all of us are using across the board, across all countries, right? So it's a great invention that came out of this university. So and the heart transplant, etc. Just giving a context, the proportionate, death under age of 5, just to give you an impact on the actual incidence of how child mortality rates in comparison to the rest of the world. And it goes interesting where I'm going in this is to show that we also have very high incidence of HIV, TB. The maps are rated on the it's shaped to the incidence rates. And why this is quite interesting is the next slide, which shows how much we spent on global health. And where the problem is that we have the highest incidence and we have the least expenditure relating to health. And how can this be bridged? It can only be bridged through appropriate health technologies. That's the underlying equation that we want to bring into today's discussion. So why appropriate health technologies? Going back to the point, we are not about getting the best of the best machines to solve the health challenges. We need to get the right kind of equipments that we need for our setting. As you may know that, there are about, based on the classifications, from the low risk to medium risk to high risk, about 35% being in the low risk category, over 50% in the high risk, and the rest in the extremely high risk category. Why this is important is also for us to understand, and I'm sure you have read through the master plan, and you also have read through the MRC report on the MedTech sector. You will see that there is a significant gap on a large proportion going into the class A type of devices, and a few going into the high risk, which is pretty much within the orthopedic implant space. What we are missing, the missing middle, is the more than 50% of the class B devices or the medium risk devices, which we do not have a very clear idea of getting it regulated within the South African market. And unless we get this into practice, that's a big economic opportunity that we're going to be missing out. I want to showcase, where the top 10 medical devices trends are going, and that wearables. It seems to be one of the key keywords, buzzwords these days. Medical robots. These are the trends where things are moving. My colleague Michael is not here, so he's researching on something around nearables. Wearables coming in contact with the patient, nearables near the patient, not even contact. That's where the technology is heading towards. But we are still struggling with basic, fundamental, day-to-day technologies, and there is this opportunity, or the challenge and the opportunity, that we do not have access to technologies and we do not have access to these advanced technologies, right? It also is an opportunity for us to bridge this and create a industry that is compelling for future investors, because this is where the trend is going in terms of newer technologies, and how do we even come closer to this? And I'm sure you're very familiar with this. I'm sure where South Africa is on this heat map of medical devices startups. And there is a small speck around Cape Town, thanks to Lindsay and his Western Cape Medical Device Cluster team, what they're doing. This is something that, there's nothing else in whole of Africa that you notice. And that's something that we, as the innovator community, the manufacturer community, will have to really take into account while we are wanting to create real impact. We always, I'm not here to talk about levels of innovation, but just to say, most of our innovative focus has been on incremental innovation. When we are trying to bring out with leapfrogging of innovation, when we are trying to bring the breakthrough innovation, the next level of innovation, new to industry products, there is very limited innovation that is happening around the medtech space, especially from LMIC countries. There are customized implants, as Vic mentioned, But the challenges with getting customized implant to regulated, it's okay for n is equal to 1, for one specific patient, but can you do it at scale? That's a question that we need to be asking. Can you do mass customization? Can you use shape models to create these customized implants that fits the population group? That's the kind of question that we need to be asking ourselves, because we cannot be solving one person's problem. We should think systems-wise. We should think population-wise for us to get here. We are pretty much in the base. We are playing the game with incremental innovations, but we need to change to go into breakthrough innovations. And that's where the real opportunity lies. And as you know, universities are well poised in the TRL 1, 2, 3s, and the industry is well poised in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and or even beyond, definitely in the 8 and 9 phase. There is a missing middle, which is the 4, 5, 6, 7, where we are looking at innovations that can actually be industrialized. And those industrialized innovations can actually come to industry for further taking it into the market. That missing middle is what would really need to be built on if we are really serious about building the medtech industry in South Africa. Universities are relatively good in R&D innovations, but the translation, the language that university speaks don't necessarily resonate with industry, and vice versa. The language that the industry speaks don't necessarily resonate with the universities. This missing middle was also something that we definitely need to be taking into account if we are looking for new and innovative medical devices to come into the market. And again, I picked this from the SAMRC report, and I would like you to just focus on the first 2 points under each category. What are the challenges, what are the barriers, and what are the enabling environments? This is directly from the SAMRC report. The challenges, 2, funding and investment, right? Second, business and technical. So those are challenges, and I'm sure that's being primarily would be addressed through the MedTech Masterplan, at least most of it. The barriers, interestingly, regulation and certification, and almost everybody in the room agrees that regulation and certification is one of their biggest challenges. And other thing is product and market understanding, precisely to what Mark, Dr. Brand was talking about, understanding the fit, the health technology assessment, the fit onto the payers, the reimbursement scales, how, how does that make a, alignment? And then the enabling interventions primarily lies in the skills and enterprise development, which I think, we all agree that we have excellent skills in South Africa. We need to build further on that to utilize these skills to improve the medtech innovations space. And of course, fostering consultation collaboration. I think this is one such event where we are fostering that. And that's an enabling environment that the 𝐻𝐿 Medical Device Cluster has enabled us to do this today. Why I'm presenting this is, again, these challenges are universal, at least to all South African medtech innovators. So it's not a standalone problem that university has, not a standalone problem that the company has. It's a problem across. What we also noted, and it also speaks to the point that Vic made, the number of startups, at least at the time of the report, Stellenbosch and 𝐒𝐴𝐶 are primarily playing a big role in the number of medtech startups that have rolled out, and the others are like relatively fewer. The science councils are also relatively fewer in this particular space, and this needs to be changed. We have a large potential across South Africa that we can tap into and create more medtech innovations and more innovation startups that could actually come into our market. So I'm glad that both Stellenbosch and 𝐒𝐴𝐶 are represented here. Thanks, Nolene, for joining us. So that's where I'm kind of leading into the innovations that we have. We have a wide variety of innovations from University of Cape Town. I'm not going to go into details of each of these innovations, but just to say that from clinical innovations to commercial pursuits, we have quite a wide variety of technologies that we have developed in-house, and we would be more than happy to talk about these technologies if you're interested. But today's talk is not about that. It's about seeing what is actually required to convert these into something usable. For example, will making technologies open source solve the problem? There is always a concern when you're dealing with universities, and I'm sure industry will agree with this. University is a nightmare. Universities tech transfer offices are a nightmare because the biggest concern is around IP, right? Who owns the IP? Is that the real reason? So we did a few exploration around open source technology. We created open source technologies. So what's the big deal about it? Apparently, we can't open source our innovations because of the National IPR Act. So if so even if a university wants to put their technologies in the open source domain, you really need to get NIPMO's permission to do that. And we have gone through this permission process, which is about 6 months to get it finally approved, because you don't want to curb the job creation potential within the country by open sourcing your technology. So the universities are not essentially protecting their IP; they are bound to the National IP Act. That is something that we need to be aware of when we are discussing with the universities. But despite that, we have been able to roll a few technologies in the open source domain and make successful impact in the open source domain as well. And we have been contributing significantly during COVID. The reason why we were able to contribute during COVID was because of emergency use authorization, because many of our technologies were approved by SAPRA for emergency use during COVID when the emergency state was put into play. And some technologies listed here, including our role in the National Ventilator Project, where we tested the National Ventilator Project here, and alongside with many other ventilation solutions in the country. So I'm going to take you through some examples of technologies that were developed in-house, innovative technologies. I'm just giving some broad examples for you to get to go back to the challenges that we have been discussing and figure out where exactly the challenges are, right? So we have a Class A device, Class B device, Class C device, Class D device, and a 3D printed device. I'm going to take you through an example through all these device categories to really understand where the challenge is, right? So device classification consideration, I'm sure all of you are aware. If not, that's a different lecture. We can I think Medical Device Cluster will organize a lecture on or interaction on classification. But these are the considerations to keep in account, sterility, invasiveness, intended use, etc., etc. So I'm going to show a simple case study. This is a technology called Head Start, which will help to position your neck while doing a procedure like bronchoscopy. You need the airways to be open. You need to position your head and neck appropriately so that the bronchoscope can go in. This is how our clinicians currently using it. They're using a stack of pillows. They're putting a pillow under the neck. They're basically tilting their head to do opening the airway. So we came up with a solution that can be adjusted, make your airway more broadly open, presented it in such a way that the jaw doesn't fall back, etc. So technically, it's a pillow replacement, right? It's a pillow replacement. That's what I want you to get as, I believe it's a pillow replacement. But so we assumed that this is Class A. So it's a non-invasive device. It's a non-active device. There's no harm or intended for the patient. The amount of time it is used, less than 60 minutes. So it fits in all the bills for a Class A device. So just to go further in detail, is this device an invasive device or a non-invasive device? If this is a non-invasive device, apply classification rules 1, 2, 3, 4. This is SAPRA, right? So we have applied SAPRA rule 1, 2, 3, 4. So what is the rules for rule 4 of SAPRA Class A device says? It does not touch contact skin only, right? It fits in that bill. But so we classified this as Class A device. Our regulators or internal auditors classified this as Class A device, which means with your self-declaration, you're ready to produce this and roll it out. I don't need to teach you, you know that. But when we got to SAPRA, this was classified as Class B. Why? Because the intended use is, though it comes on contact with the skin, the procedure may go over 60 minutes, right? And it is also potentially, there could be an injury in the neck while the bronchoscope is being done. I'm not saying SAPRA is wrong. SAPRA is absolutely right. But this clarity of what is required for us to get a medical device to certification is lacking in our environment. I'm talking about a very bare minimal fundamental Class A device, which can change from Class A to Class B with a simple rule change. What does that mean? No more, my self-declaration is sufficient. Now I have to go into clinical trials. A colleague there really highlighted the problems with clinical trials. That was music to me because I was going to speak to that as well. So thank you for making my life easier. So this is what I think is preventing the innovative solutions to coming into market. That the lack of clarity on the certifications and regulations compliance is something that we need to be really aware of when we are introducing new products. Okay, so another interesting device, Class B device, at least to our understanding, it's an active device. It's a endoscope that goes into female uterus, non-invasive. It goes into the uterus. It goes into the uterine cavity. It has a flexible tip with minimal intervention. One could actually reach and see the cervix and the uterus of a woman and see if there is any abnormality and screen the whole thing. Class B from our side. We are happy with Class B because we want to do clinical trials, get in, get out this. But this comes with a disposable sheath that actually prevents, it's almost like a condom, so a disposable sheath that prevents from fluid interaction with the actual device. So good. We have been happy with going into Class B, which means we are going to go into the preclinical trial, we're going into the routine clinical examination, pilot trials, etc. The conundrum is whether it is Class A or Class B. We are very much settled in Class B, right? We are very happy with that. But we got a review report saying that this is a Class A device. Okay, we're very happy about it because it goes into self-declaration. I'm just bringing what is the challenge with the lack of understanding of the regulatory space. Something that as simple as a pillow is now a Class B device, something that goes into the body, bends into the body and sees and captures images is a Class A device because there is a sheath that is preventing the contact of the device to the person. Right? And this is something that I really, I would really like us to think deeper and develop an appreciation for, because it's not that easy as we think. The regulatory compliance achievement is not that easy as we think. So we may be sometimes, in this case, we have been over-prepared, but, it's better to be over-prepared than being under-prepared. Right? This, again, interesting example, probably the most sophisticated ventilator that was developed in South Africa during the pandemic, 𝐸𝐶. This was developed in our center, and we got emergency use authorization. We followed the same principle that we used for the National Ventilator Project, got emergency use authorization. We were going into trials. Then, mid-2022, emergency use authorization was withdrawn. What does that mean? Suddenly, none of these ventilation devices, though it has got a previously emergency use authorization for use in emergency state, cannot be used without full-fledged SAPRA trial. For us, it's okay because we've got one device or a few prototypes of the device, the latest version of which we submitted for SAPRA approval, and the emergency use authorization was withdrawn. So far, so good. We're not worried about that. But I just want us to reflect on the pandemic fund. I mean, the big project that we had, the National Ventilator Project. We made 20,000 ventilators during the pandemic, right? What happened to those 20,000 ventilators? Because if only 8,000 of them were rolled out into public usage or clinical usage. But what's really the state? We have so much of data that these ventilators were actually providing a lot of support to otherwise to patients who don't have ventilators. But we cannot use these 20,000 ventilators without having a full-fledged clinical trial of these ventilators. So currently, the Treasury has 20,000 ventilators that needs regulatory approval. We have spent millions, if not hundreds of millions, in that particular national project, and that is not taking any further because of lack of continuity of processes. We have emergency use authorization. We dropped emergency use authorization. What next? There was no planning in terms of transition from emergency use to get a full-fledged license. There was no planning in terms of getting the clinical evidence that we generated during the emergency use authorization to use that for our own national benefit, to get our regulators to use that. This is not to say that the regulators are at fault. They are doing their job, as Vic mentioned. They are there to protect the patients or the people of the country. But I think it's a collective effort as policy influences all the people in the room and all the stakeholders within the space, there is a responsibility on each one of us to actually take this step next to ensure that we identify these gaps where the things drop and see how we can optimally use our resources. Again, this is a Class C device. Again, this is no way a criticism presentation. This is a reflection on our journey as an innovator, coming out with innovative medical devices, holding a lot of patents, securing a lot of investment, going into clinical trial where we have the challenges. And I'm just sharing that experience. We had this brilliant innovative solution called 𝐒𝐻𝐵 came out of a center, did fantastic. We got multiple patents on this. And the intended purpose is to use self-administering adrenaline in an event of anaphylactic reaction. So basically, when a patient gets an anaphylactic shock, they need to self-administer adrenaline. So these auto-injectors are Class C medical devices, very high-risk devices. We understand that. Class C medical devices, we understand that. So what does that mean? We go to SAPRA, and SAPRA basically says that we don't have the capacity to evaluate your device. So now you have a choice. Go to CE or FDA, get it certified, come back. We will get it SAPRA certified, and you can use it. So the change here is when we went out to CE or FDA, for in this instance, this was not turned away from being a Class C medical device into a pharmaceutical product because it carries a pharmaceutical in it, right? So now this pharmaceutical product has gotten FDA approval for us to come and do clinical trial, and the SAPRA further approved the clinical trial where we were able to, the company which is running this technology is now able to use that clinical trial data. They conducted the first-in-human clinical trial, very positive for first-in-human trial. But the company is able to use that data to further advance its solution so that it can get SAPRA certification. The loop is we are not able to get, though innovative product, so much of clinical evidence, or for the event of getting clinical evidence, we have to go to CE and FDA to come back to SAPRA to get the clinical evidence. Now we have clinical evidence, and we are hoping that our regulators or our regional regulators will take this product and certify them for local use. Again, a simple device, easy squeezy. This device, a Class A medical device, it's an add-on to a normal inhaler to make life easy for inhaler users. We have gone all route to say that this is a medical device Class A, but then it is not a medical device. It is an assist device because an assisted device doesn't require certifications. So though we have complied with all the requirements of Class A medical device, this has been classified as an assistive device. Again, it's a downgrade of a classification, which we are very pleased with, but that doesn't mean we can get away with all the requirements of regulation. The point, what I'm trying to say here is, we really need to synchronize, we need to have an active, responsive, and agile regulatory body that will be responsive to these, to make decisions on medical devices to make them easier to roll out in the market. Labeling considerations, we are still following the international standards for labeling, and I'm sure all the manufacturers, and I think it's something that we really need to move on from here. We need to understand that just putting a QR code will not be sufficient. We still need paper backup, all that, right? So and especially in South Africa, we need all possible languages interpretation with that particular thing. So I'm not going to go into this, and I'm happy to chat about it if you're interested. But we really need to compare the benefit and risk in medical devices before approving medical devices for approval for clinical usage, because if there are what we were able to achieve during the pandemic, we have stopped benefiting from that because we are now looking at the risk more than the benefit. We should actually have a striking balance between risk and benefit for us to make any impact in the medtech sector. As you know, the medical devices sector, the compliance is a big player in this whole space. And as if you align this with the previous the TRL levels that we discussed, this usually starts around TRL 4.5, where the ISO 13485 certification comes into play. But I think it's important that academic institutions also learn that it's quite crucial to have 13485 at the ideation phase. You don't reinvent the wheel or create the dossiers later. So, I just want to highlight the NIH model for health technology innovation cycle, which focuses on 4 parallel developments when we are going into medical device innovation. So there is a clinical readiness level, there is a market business readiness level, there is a regulatory readiness level, and there is a technical readiness level. And I think we need to be really focusing on all the 4 concurrently to bring an idea or an unmet need into a standard of care. And this needs to be concurrent and it cannot be in isolation. Why? Because only then you can go from need. You should actually have a uniform deployment from technical, regulatory, market, and clinical. We do focus on technical. We tend to focus on clinical at a much later stage, and we have a heavy emphasis on regulation. And I'm sure we also take into account business from a market needs point of view. But this development needs to be parallel, and it cannot be deficient on one area while the other area is developing. And we need to kind of follow a tedious, like a parallel 4-track route for us to get MedTech into market. But then we may de-risk ourselves from going into developing technology without a clinical need, or developing technology which can never be approved by our regulatory body. So which has been a case in our situation. This is quite a detailed expectation on what is needed at each stage, and I'm happy to share if you're interested. And our good friend Harry's slide, which always says there are multiple valleys of death. Why? Because at each phase, there is a potential that the technology could die. And we really need to make sure that we have interventions that are focusing on these valleys of death to bridge those valleys of death. So there is a landscape shift in South Africa. We are part of the 𝐒𝐚𝐻𝐼𝐵ONA, which actually allows us to potentially use a consortium approach for regulatory compliance. And I'm sure you're aware of the 𝐒𝐚𝐻𝐼𝐵ONA regulatory space. Thanks, Vic. I took it from your master plan, the various breakdown of the MedTech Masterplan, and a subsequent proposal that is in discussion with the DIC. This was from Jeremy Ballas from CSIR. I'm not going to go into details of this, but there is a call for action in terms of, if we were to support Vic and the DTIC and the government of South Africa for implementing the MedTech Masterplan, what do we need to do? There have been various suggestions that have come out so far, and I'm going to add a few more suggestions that will align the push and the pull, the push from innovation, the pull from the market. Thanks to Mladen, who has been championing this particular area where there's been a push for having formal recognition for skilled engineers in this space. Biomedical engineers and clinical engineers would, pending 𝐒𝐚𝐻𝐼𝐵, the Engineering Council approval, will potentially have an Engineering Council of South Africa approval to make them a practicing engineers in South Africa. And Mladen has been championing this exercise, and we had the opportunity to support him in this particular exercise. And the final decision is pending 𝐒𝐻𝐼𝐵's approval, 𝐋CO approval, but we are very hopeful that this will change how we look at the skilled workforce that we are looking in for the MedTech sector into going forward. So watch out the space. If we have any changes, we'll keep you informed. I think we need innovation approach. We cannot do innovation in isolation. University cannot survive without industry, and industry would need university. So, use us. We are your free R&D. Use us, and we will use you, if you allow us to take our innovations across the board. Ethics clearance challenges. Thanks to my colleague who actually put out such a wonderful demonstration. I think this is, Vic, if there is one thing that I would request, it would be something to get ethical challenges, streamlined. I'm not saying removed, streamlined. The problem is we need clinical data to get ethics to get SAPRA approval. For us to get clinical data, we need ethics to get to clinics. Ethics will need us to have our devices SAPRA certified, and SAPRA would want us to have clinical data. So it becomes a chicken and egg problem. We don't have SAPRA approval. We don't have clinical evidence. We have wonderful innovations that sits in our cupboards, in our shelves, not making any move, because the balance or the expectation between the new innovations that needs clinical data and the devices that requires SAPRA certification is not matching. There is a mismatch here. So how do we get over it? We need to have a streamlined ethical board that actually looks into university-based innovations. A large portion of the universities, we are having a consortium of universities, which I'm happy to be part of, which have, the consortium was put together by voluntary medtech innovators from universities who are dealing with ethics challenges with their respective institutions and with SAPRA. So we will come out with a recommendation what could be done within that space. I think there needs to be a differentiation between what is permissible to do pilot clinical trials to what is permissible to get SAPRA certification. The other challenge is for us to have SAPRA certifications, we need our devices or our universities to be ISO 13485 certified. Not every university is in that direction. Fortunately, University of Cape Town is working towards is in the process of getting the ISO 13485, which we should be having in the next month or so, which will allow us to have our own SAPRA certifications to go into clinical trials. But University of Cape Town is not the only university. We have so many other universities in the country, with so many other R&D centers, science councils in the country, which needs a similar kind of certification issues, and that needs to be streamlined. So unless we streamline the HVEC or the ethics clearance challenges, we will not get any of proudly South African devices into market. Point blank. There's no change if we don't change the status quo in the ethics challenges. Increased awareness of compliance requirement, and I need to be compliant to Lindy's request of maintaining time, so I'm going to run quickly. So I think goes back to one of the questions that was raised previously. We need to have more and more certification awareness on what is required. Very important. We need testing facilities, Vic. We come out with fantastic medical devices. Ventilators, for example, the ventilator that we developed required compliance with 22 or 25 ISO standards. In South Africa, we don't have any of those testing facilities. How do we get around this? If a master plan includes a strategic growth, it should be about also testing our medical devices that comes out of our market. So that will avoid the problems of somebody procuring from elsewhere, white labeling it and selling it in the country. We need to have certification facilities. Without certification facilities, none of our devices will be standardized. Without standardization, the market that we are talking about, the volume that we are talking about cannot be achieved, because only if we are able to standardize a product, we will be able to sell this product in other markets other than South Africa. So let's not be narrow in our thinking. Let's think broader. So we really need to have these facilities. Preferential procurement, I'm not going to be preaching to the convert. We need preferential procurement. How it works, I don't know, but somehow we need to bring that into place. And further investments for SA appropriate technologies. There are problems that are very unique to South Africa and Africa, and we need to really think about technologies that addresses violence, technology that addresses gender-based violence, or road trauma accidents. There are no other countries that has as much as incidents as we do. So we need to prioritize these. And with the latest announcements from the country with 51 states, I'm sure we are all aware of what that simple rule change elsewhere can affect to the most vulnerable population, the TB HIV survivors. So we really need to be thinking inwards in terms of identifying what is the most important health challenges that require innovations and solutions, and we need to look further onto that. With that, I would like to say a big thank you for your attention, and apologies for the technical hiccup, but it helped me to also overcome the solutions. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Professor. Really appreciate it. in view of time, in view of the fact that we're running a little bit late. Oh, sorry. Thanks very much. We've got how many engineers in the room? Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for that. Sure, it's something small. I'd like to introduce you to somebody who has been in the market in the South African medtech industry for many, many years, having worked for some major multinational companies up in Gauteng, and has finally decided to take the plunge and move down to the Western Cape. Somebody who's really knowledgeable on medtech, and I'm talking about Mark Brand, who's sitting here on my right-hand side. Mark is a proudly South African citizen living in the Western Cape with 40 years extensive experience in the medtech industry. His career spans engineering to commerce, business management, and health strategy, health economics, and health technology assessment. His experience includes a unique blend and ability to align strategic thinking and execution with market access, HTA, and health economics to improve patient access to innovative medical technologies and value-based healthcare. He has held various leadership positions in the corporate environment across a diverse range of medical technologies and recognized for developing and executing innovative initiatives for improving patient access to health technologies. Mark's an active member of the Professional Society for Health Economics and Outcomes Research, ISPOR, Health Technology Assessment International, and current president of the ISPOR SA chapter. He's chair of a council for medical schemes, CMS, benefits definition clinical advisory committee. And Mark has co-authored and facilitated clinical guideline development and articles on health technology policy. And he currently conducts seminars on strategic market access online and on-site, and has served as faculty for the University of Stellenbosch Certificate in Health Technology Assessment. Mark has just recently moved down to the Western Cape and travelled in this morning from Kleinmond. So we'd like to thank you very much for making the time. Mark.
Thanks, Lindsay. When you say 40 years like that, you'd never believe I've been in this industry since I was 8. I'm just thinking twice about whether I should actually include that little detail in the bio. Correct. Wow, thank you. Thanks for the invitation, Lindsay. It's really a privilege to be part of an illustrious panel to present to you today. Let's get the full picture up. And is there a remote, or what do we tap? Okay. The old way, tap the forward arrow. That will get you somewhere. Thank you. So I'm going to really talk to you about a somewhat complex subject that takes us a bit beyond what might have been spoken today with respect to the regulatory framework. And it's more about market access in South Africa. And embedded in that, it would be things like reimbursement for your product, health technology assessment that I'll talk mostly to. It's going to be a little bit more nuanced towards the innovative side of health tech or med tech. So I'm not sure if it's going to be relevant, but nonetheless, I think you're all, perhaps most of you, have been exposed to market access challenges of your own, depending on your particular product. So let's continue then. And I think when everyone starts talking about market access, health economics, health technology assessment, clinical evidence,
I think it evokes many different responses. You're probably all, if you've been in the space for a while, you've probably all experienced these. Somewhere in there, I'm not sure, I haven't seen it, but personally, there's an element of nausea that creeps in as well. But all is not lost. I think there really is a way around that, around this. And I say this in all sincerity, and I think you're all business people. I think there's an opportunity to really, yes, dig into these concepts and understand the processes that you're faced in this country, learn about them, and integrate them into the way you're doing business, instead of having to really spend and invest a lot of time and money in resources, like with all due respect, health economists, employ people who are doing these type of market access jobs. So a lot of what I have to say really talks to you as a business person right now who's already in the space and has already got a lot to do, but how to add this to a portfolio and how to make it easy for yourself. And I hope it comes through that way. I'm really thankful and I really appreciate the opportunity to listen to Vic talking about the master plan. I mean, been a long time coming, quite frankly. But and again, hopefully, Vic, you'll hear comments made about, to your point, you spoke about. I hope this is breaking up a bit, so I hope you're hearing it clearly. You speak about mostly the entry-level regulatory framework, the market authorization component of the regulatory framework. I'm going to take you a little bit beyond to what I see as more of the next level regulation, as it were, where we start talking about delivering value for money in health technology. So this is what we all see from a market access perspective. We reflect it. I reflect this as a series of hurdles. Okay, the first three would be your classic hurdles that you would address in the regulatory process. We all go through these processes, whether internationally, we've heard about FDA, we've heard about the European Union. European Union has jacked their systems up somewhat for a little bit more rigor, okay, so that we do guarantee safe medical technologies internationally and access to safe medical technologies. So they've amped up their requirements, particularly for the high class type devices, the class C and Ds. These would be implants, these would be typically electromedical type devices, anything with a physiological reaction. But nevertheless, safety, efficacy, and quality would by and large be the elements and the hurdles you have to overcome to get market authorization. That everyone probably understands right now. I'm going to take you a bit beyond that to more, who's going to pay for it? Okay, our experience in this country, if we look at the different reimbursement pathways, okay, we have our private and public sector, just, bilateral type of system, each of which have their own pathways for reimbursement. I'm going to focus mostly on private sector. Why? Because when we're talking about innovation coming into this country, the general entry point is in the private sector. Okay, not least of all because the expertise and the skills, and I mean clinical expertise and skills exist. With all due respect to the public sector hospitals, the reality is that from a skills base and an affordability base, it does start in the private sector. Somewhat limited, one might argue. Sorry, I'm just going to grab my bottle of water. Things do dry up for a while. And in the public sector, I don't want to say it's a little easier, but the decision-making process is somewhat simpler. It largely depends on the strength of motivation by a key opinion leader or a key head of department in a particular speciality. So getting back to what we have to prove to whoever's going to pay for it. When I use the term payer, I'm talking about a government or private sector payer. It becomes academic at the end of the day, and we're all looking at NHI as becoming a huge purchaser of healthcare in the future. But what do we need to look at, or what do we need to show? Again, when it comes to innovation, naturally we need to look at cost effectiveness, not the same thing as cheapest. Understand that. Many would like you to think that, but it's not the same. We're looking at, obviously, affordability, and that talks to budget impact, okay? Very clear. In whichever sector we're dealing with, budget impact is the most important. We have elements within that. We're looking at presenting evidence-based medicine, clinical evidence. We're looking at economic evaluation, the various types of evaluations that we've come to learn. And then we're looking at decision-making processes that follow the analysis of the data that you present, multi-criteria decision analysis or decision-making, using more often than not over and above the data we get from trials and randomized controlled trials. Over and above, we start looking at real-world data and real-world evidence. And that is where we introduce this concept called health technology assessment. I'm sorry, to me, this is sounding very scratchy, so I hope it's not annoying you. So anyone come across this technology? Well, maybe another question to ask, has anyone not heard about it? Good, not preaching. I'm preaching to the converted. Lindsay, thanks very much. I think we can continue now. Everyone knows this. No, jokes aside, just to start with, quickly to throw up the definition of health technology. It's everything. It's literally everything. Okay, our focus will be on devices or medtech, but I wanted to bring this up bring up the definition. It's a relatively new definition for health technology assessment, but more so focusing on two key elements that have been introduced to the definition of HTA. It's determining the value and assessing the technology at different stages of the life cycle. This starts becoming interesting because we're looking at early stage technology assessment, we're looking at mid-stage technology assessment, and naturally late stage. And what are we going to achieve out of that? Again, for anyone who's been living under a rock and not necessarily familiar with HTA or the implications of HTA, this is really just a little timeline of where HTA has actually been mentioned in different pieces of legislation and within the broader health technology legislative framework. It actually is embedded in the ANC National Health Plan, which then eventually became the Act. And if you just follow the timeline, everywhere there's discussion about health technology assessment. Why? Because we need to manage resources better. All right. Madeleine mentioned literally 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there was a lot of work done around medtech, health technology assessment, and a strategy. Sadly, given the dynamics and the churn within the same government, as it were, we've struggled for consistency in terms of the approach. We run the risk as an industry of playing second fiddle to the pharma industry, in the sense that there will be attempts, because it's easier, there will be attempts to apply assessment methodology used for medicines to medical devices without necessarily the understanding or application of the nuances of medtech in that assessment process. It is a huge risk for us. The common thread in these policy documents is the establishment of institutionalized HTA. What does that mean? Not necessarily a bricks and mortar and employing people in an agency. I prefer to see it more of a coordinated network of skill sets between academia and private sector and all stakeholders involved in the assessment process. By that, I mean all stakeholders, from patient, from user, from payer, again, using the broad definition of payer, and institution and healthcare provider. All right, be they either hospital and or your healthcare provider, your medical practitioners. It has to be founded. This is actually mentioned in any pieces of these legislative pieces. It's founded on the principles of independence, transparency, and participation, and or accountability. These fundamentals are important to the success of an HTA process. There is, however, an absence of any empowering legislation for the formal establishment of an HTA agency. You will be told that, no, hang on, this is currently embedded in the NHI Act. Well, is it? You'll see it right at the back of the Act, section 57C or D or something. There's going to be a transitional arrangement for the centralization and creation of an HTA committee who will look at benefit at technologies and subsequent benefit design for the NHI world. That's still a way to go, but those wheels are turning. So at the end of the day, if there's no legislative framework, any recommendations that come out of that process will lack legitimacy and therefore enforceability. Apologize, I'm getting you tongue-tied here. Right now, where we are is that even if we were to limit this to the private sector, it's so fragmented in the sense that this is a key component of demystifying the private sector, where we know we have about 75 odd medical schemes. And to get those medical aid schemes to pay for anything that you might sell, we don't have to see all of them. They're largely administered by three major groups. And you may recognize them: Discovery, MedScheme, Momentum. There it is. So we narrow it down quite easily to those organizations who have their own departments who look at the evidence, etc., and whatever you present them to convince them to pay. The problem is that they do their own thing. They by and large do similar things, but not the same. They can come out with completely different recommendations. My point with going back to having the legal frameworks in place for HTA, if a recommendation comes out of that organization, given that it would have gone through a very rigorous process, hopefully, including all stakeholders, without that legislative framework, any recommendations from that agency could simply be ignored. To give you an example, and dare I use it as an example, but it is in the pharmaceutical space, we have pharmacoeconomic guidelines, okay? Not mandatory, so these are guidelines to determine pharmaceutical pricing. It's not mandatory, okay? So suppliers don't have to do it if they don't want to. And even if they were done, the output of that doesn't compel a medical aid to pay for it. So in a nutshell, what's the point? We don't want to have that situation. Coming back to home, our industry, and this specifically talks to the innovative space, we understand, and this is, I think this is in the US, the point I want to make here is that there's more often than not an R&D, a research and development focus, where small enterprises are, we've heard it, scarce on resources, short of money, and very difficult to spend the types of investments that people are asking for research data, okay? The companies are literally motivated by survival rather than implementing a framework towards successful device innovation. What is that framework? We're starting to talk more about health technology assessment and gathering information or generating information that can be gathered to present. It is at this early stage that assumptions should be deeply explored, and the design and development of changes can be adopted to provide the most optimal outcomes. In that statement, we're talking about what information do we need to actually generate to satisfy the needs and expectations of the end user and the end payer, most importantly. I'll probably come back to that very briefly. So there was always the issue of, how are innovations, or how is innovation defined? So NICE, if you haven't heard of it, is basically the UK-based HTA agency, HTA organization, who look at, and they have a very, very rigorous process. They will look at all technologies, whatever it might be, and come out with recommendations that are mandatory in the NHS. Okay, but really, this process they've introduced fast tracks the assessment process, and forces the organization to assess and take into account a far broader collective of information and data. But they will first and foremost look at the novelty condition, okay, the innovative characteristics, what the substantial benefits are, and the demonstrable and uncounted benefits condition. So they have a system in place. There's some other countries who do very similar work, but the recognition is that, yes, we know innovative medtech, innovative devices, as opposed to medicines, often at the early stage of their life cycle, at commercialization, have very little data, in fact, to support their value. So this opens up a whole new scope of how to assess medical technologies from a medtech point of view. So again, what comes into it to really direct this process is the element of severity of the condition being treated, associated with the unmet need, and the therapeutic added value. I want to quickly just reflect and moving towards trying to approach this perhaps a little bit differently to what you do now. So I put this little schematic together. Should be very familiar to you. Product life cycle. We all go through this process where we introduce the technology. We go through a growth phase, which is very exciting. We hit maturity. We start considering our options, whether to continue or ways of actually giving this particular product a new life, or just let it decline. So classic approach is to naturally introduce it. We get some people excited, we generate a demand in the introduction phase, and it flies under the radar until such time, and specifically the funder, until such time sees, oh, hang on, we're paying for something we're unfamiliar with. What do? They say, well, let's cut everything off until we know more about this particular technology. And we end up with what I call the reimbursement gap. So in that growth phase, now you've invested a ton of money. We've got a sales team. We've done a lot of marketing, and we're promoting this thing hell for leather. But the funder stops funding. You still have those overheads. You have no sales. So the point is, how do you reactively respond to closing the reimbursement gap? Or better still, with a bit more proactivity, how do we minimize or eliminate the reimbursement gap? And this is where we talk about HTA and aligning strategy. So it comes back to applying HTA principles in the pre-market phase. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it all applies to every position in the life cycle, whether you're in growth, maturity, or renewal phase. It needs to be considered a circular process. You need to constantly come back to make sure in the growth phase, are we getting it used right? In the maturity phase, is it still cost effective? In the decline phase, can we look at using it for a different indication just to revive that product? Those are HTA type concepts and principles, having to prove with clinical and economic evidence along the way. So HTA is introduced in that space. So I'm going to introduce a concept called early HTA or 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐩TA, where at pre-marketing level or pre-commercialization level, there are certain principles that are being developed. By no means a new concept, but can be very useful for you in terms of your innovation. The definition for early HTA would be an HTA conducted to inform decisions about subsequent development, research, and/or investment by explicitly evaluating the potential value of a concept or actual health technology. So let me try and explain that away. You have this idea. It probably comes from a group of biomedical engineers working with clinicians, and you've invented the better mousetrap. I like to think you probably get some consensus in terms of meeting a particular unmet clinical need. And then you need to take it probably to investors. And then that's all good. And no doubt you're doing that now. But right now, you've got to think about way down the line, you have to convince someone to pay for it. Because you'll go through this investment, you'll generate some data to show that it indeed works. But you'll get to a point where you're going to ask someone to pay for it, and they're going to say, well, what's in it for me? What's the value to this? Show me your evidence. You're probably going to show, oh, well, it works. Yes, we know it works, but how does it perform against, what is the standard of care? We didn't think of that. Okay. Have we considered all outcomes features of this that are impacted by this particular technology? And then over and above that, we should be looking at collecting economic data. Okay, we need to be considering all the economic inputs into the process as well. Often impacted by introducing this technology and changing maybe the patient pathway entirely. And along the way, knocking off some offset costs. Yes, the investment in the new technology might be high. However, if we can show there's significant offset costs downstream, for argument's sake, that starts adding to the narrative for a good value proposition. So the role of early HTA in access to innovation, in my opinion, guarantees eliminating of arbitrary pricing and reimbursement decisions, identifying and assigning future tasks and institutional and individual responsibilities. That, incidentally, is where, yes, now you're sitting as a group of stakeholders, there's still some uncertainty with certain evidence. However, the available evidence is still compelling to go forward, compelling in the sense that it's not going to do any harm, patients are safe, but there is perceived value, not yet documented, not proven, but how about we assign or we recognize certain centers where we can roll this out, and we work with highly skilled surgeons. We work with the industry. You might come to the party we'll come to the party with the product. We work with the hospitals, and within that little micro ecosystem, it's a wonderful opportunity to create, to roll out a managed access program for an innovative device. Okay, because it's so, if I can say, for want of a better expression, insular. Everyone in that institution should be talking to each other and gathering the relevant data, and then focusing. And then the funder, of course, is part of it. The payer is part of that, because now they say, well, that's exciting. We will channel any of our members who need that treatment to your center, and we'll all look at the same data at the end of it. We'll agree with what data we're collecting, and then we'll all assess the data. So that's just an example. And then I think we can conclude that HTA drives change, or better said, is essential in healthcare innovation. I just wanted to unpack. You could probably look at this research yourself. So again, another reflection or representation using the PLC. All the innovators will be in this early HTA space, where you're looking at proof of concept, looking at, from an economic standpoint, and using some sort of headroom analysis to look at, okay, at what point can we peg an in-market price that still offers value? Okay, so it also includes that starting point. And then so it goes on. This is very much, there's a lot of science and methodology behind this in the pharma space. So in the red block, if you can see it, in the red block is really the early HTA space. Then the green block is more the traditional mainstream HTA. You'll see 1, 2, and 3. Those are phase 1, 2, and 3 studies. Often MedTech don't even go through those processes. But that is changing somewhat now, because there is a demand on industry, manufacturers, OEMs, to produce the right information to deliver to decision makers. So moving to closure, there are methods that are being developed and are evolving to look at, and that you should use to look at the nature and magnitude of the problem. That will determine your opportunity, naturally. Then estimating the nature and magnitude of the value, looking at the headroom analysis, and the economic benefit to society. Then conditions that need to be met. This is important, particularly for MedTech, where we need people to use it, skilled people, because that drives efficiency. We need to identify the right setting, okay? Whether it's in an acute hospital environment, or a step down, or a day clinic situation, or even at bedside or in consulting room. Each of those have significant impact on the economic inputs. And lastly, this is an opportunity to really develop and design the right type of research that's going to give you information that you need to convince the industry. Hopefully, this process would have included the payer as one of the stakeholders engaged in the process. It's whether they have an appetite for this. I think our payers have to change their mindsets a bit. But if there's enough critical mass and there's enough pressure on them to do so, if there's a benefit at the end of the day for them, I think we'll get them around the table. Lastly, just to really simplify it, I started off by saying this is often very difficult for all of you who are trying to run business and wondering, well, how am I going to find the time to do it? So first of all, you're getting into a business because you have a particular technology. Again, this applies anywhere to any product, wherever it might be in the life cycle. You're getting into business because you have what you believe is the right technology. You have good clinical support for it. You understand the business opportunity based on the epidemiology data. You understand your competitor landscape. And of course, your marketing, what you have to invest to promote this, how you price it, and so on. To go through this process and generate information for a technology assessment, I would say you probably have 60% of the information already, if you've done that upfront work properly and you understand your own business properly. Because what does HTA entail? It involves presenting the technology, perhaps nuanced a little bit differently. A clinical review, that would be a full review of what evidence there exists to support it, and naturally recognizing and understanding any evidence gaps. And then nature of the target condition, that's the disease being treated, and the comparator analysis, that's your competitor landscape. So I would say this is about 60% of what work you should have done in the first place. And then you take it through an economic evaluation, and hopefully it just validates what you did in your initial headroom analysis, and then you compile the document and present it, and submit it, I should say, whoever it might be. So the whole process needs to be seen as a continuous loop. So not linear, should provide for continuous review and assessment of the technology, offers an opportunity to perform horizon scanning for multiple stakeholders in the sector to anticipate new applications and new usage. It should provide a platform for constructive engagement between stakeholders on outcomes. It should validate claims, and it will also help migrate or increase the scope of the application of your particular technology. My closing remark here is that, yes, we're all under pressure. Very few device companies, even the multinationals, have the luxury of appointing departments of market access specialists. And by that, I mean epidemiologists, clinical researchers, and health economists, sometimes all rolled into one, because they just don't have that sort of pipeline that will keep them busy. So that then falls onto you, particularly in the environment, our device environment, where the companies are mostly small. Someone has to pick up the slack. And with the correct coaching and understanding this process a little better, you can do it. So on that note, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Mark. Appreciate the time.
Happy to answer questions now, or I don't know if we still have the panel.
Let's take a question or two now, and then we can obviously look at more intense questions during the open session. Anybody have a question for Mark now? Let me start it then by asking you. Take for example a Discovery Health. They have quite a
Good day.
yeah. They have quite a rigorous evaluation process to get onto the formulary with a new product, and they have more documentation to exclude you than include. If you're looking at a product that is, let's call it a Class A product, that is not very technical at all, is it a simple process to go through, or at the end of the day, is it if the product is similar to what they're currently using, would they change for any clinical reason, or would it be a price decision?
Lindsay, you partly answered your own question, but I think it comes down to if it falls into an existing category. So they would see it from terms of a claims category for that type of device. So they've been paying for other devices in the same class. They'll know what they're prepared to pay for. So introducing something which is a class A or B, and any other for that matter, which is positioned at a very similar price, they'll by and large automatically approve it. That's what they say. But if you want to go in now, generally the class A, and correct me if I'm wrong, could be shouted down, but generally your class A and B products may be more on the commodity side. I don't know. But so if you're stretching the price beyond what the average claims price is within that category, they're going to ask questions. So they're going to drill a supply for, hang on, you've got to come into life, because there's nothing in it for us. You're asking us to pay a premium for something that you haven't proven substantial benefit or additional benefit for that incremental increase in the price. So that's the short answer for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We will have a session just after Prof. Sudesh, where we'll get into very much more meat on the bone. But thanks very much indeed. Appreciate it. May I ask that we get straight into the panel discussions? May I ask the speakers, presenters to please take a seat? And I'd ask Mladen to please join us. And by way of introduction, the panel now, Mladen Paluta here. If you don't know him yet, you haven't lived. Mladen's been active in the fields of biomedical and clinical engineering, health technology management, and medical device innovation for over 40 years, Mark, 40 years. He established the program in health technology management in 1999, and in 2016 joined the Western Cape Department of Health as Director, Health Technology. Mladen has served in an advisory capacity and as a consultant for the South African Medical Research Council, the National Department of Health, the CSIR, and the World Health Organization, as well as other national and international organizations. He currently holds honorary positions at the universities of Stellenbosch and Pretoria. He is a director of the Southern Right Health Technology Management Consulting Group and is president-elect of the Global Clinical Engineering Alliance. Please welcome the group of panelists. Thank you. I think as an opening statement, what I would like to just bring to everybody's attention from the MedTech Masterplan, as it's now called, that the majority, 76% of companies in the South African medtech sector are classified as small or micro enterprises with turnover of between 10 and 50 million rand. That's quite a significant number, 76%. What's also interesting from a Deloitte's research paper commissioned by the Department of Trade and Industry back in 2014 is that 41% of all medical device medtech manufacturers are based here in the Western Cape. That's quite a large number as well. 41% of all medtech manufacturers are based in the Western Cape. And that was in 2014. That's a good 11 years ago. So what I'm suggesting is that that number has probably increased significantly. Also from the MedTech Masterplan, South Africa is one of the largest medtech markets across Africa and the Middle East. The market size was estimated at 21 billion rand in 2021 and is projected to grow to 29.6 billion by 2025. the South African government is the major purchaser of healthcare equipment and supplies, with the public healthcare sector comprising 7,901 facilities with 85,000 beds. The private sector has 524 facilities with 40,514 beds. I want to just repeat that number. The private sector has 7,900 facilities. The public, sorry, my apologies, I can't read my own writing. The public sector has 7,900, call it 8,000 facilities with 85,000 beds. The private sector has 524 facilities with 40,000 beds. Those are significant numbers. And I think as part of our panel today, there are two issues which I would like to raise and bring to your attention, and that is the collaboration which we all should be sharing with each other as an industry body, an industry association. Academia, government, and the private sector are represented here today. And with those three, which we normally call the triple helix, those are the three elements which are the foundation of a good system. If you have government and the private sector and academia working together in unison, you will have an excellent system. So collaboration is paramount to ensuring that the industry grows in South Africa, particularly in the Western Cape. We have Westgrow as a fantastic example of an organization here in the Western Cape that really supports the Western Cape Medical Devices Cluster. Their champion, of course, is Mandy Swanepoel, who's having a baby next week, so she can't be at this event. The second part I want to bring to your attention is, in addition to collaboration, is that we are essentially a unit, okay? And a unit in this context requires us to share, okay? And I have found from personal experience that if one is prepared to share, obviously without giving away, critical information about your IP and so on, then one is very open to new ideas and listening to other individuals, but also assisting other individuals in growing the market. I give you a simple example. I had a professor come and see me the other day. He's 75 years old, still practicing, professor from UCT, and he is in the obstetrics and gynae space, and he has developed a product. He's innovated a product at 75 years old. And he asked us if we could assist him with the assembly and so forth. So it just shows you age is not a factor here. Really, we're all in this industry together, and it's up to us, essentially, to grow the market. What I would like to do is to say to you that this group of individuals over here, we have academia, we have previously working for government at a very senior level, we have private sector over there, and we have quasi-government stroke private sector in Vic. You have such a team of individuals here, and what I would like to do is open the floor by just posing a question: is how can the industry collaborate in a more effective way, given the current political climate in this country, given the current challenges which we've heard about from Professor Sudesh's presentation? What is it that is needed to actually create the greatest impact, the highest impact, to get this industry off the ground? I see you nodding, Professor. I see you nodding your head. Is there something that you have on your mind?
No, so I do have something in the mind, but I thought it would be respectful to have a remark from Madeline.
And then I'll come in.
Okay. Well, thanks. So I think there's always a danger of being excessively internal looking at thing. I think that's also, I'm not criticizing the master planning very big. So, but I mean, you know, there are very important areas that have not been touched on. One thing's are digital health and AI in that space. And in this day and age, you can't separate medical devices and digital health solutions because they have huge leapfrogging opportunities. The other one is, what about collaborating with other African countries and other African institutions? We've spoken about access to the African market, we've spoken about, you know, regulation and developing a common regulatory framework across African countries is important. But I was part of the WHO project 10 years ago that looked at local production and technology transfer in low-resource countries, which had 4 African countries. And there was a fantastic report that was produced, and it really suggested the importance of collaborating with our African colleagues. You know, because they've got great skills. Look what's happening in Eastern Africa in the digital health space. Enormous number of great innovations. So, you know, we need to actually reach out to them and recognize that part of this is a very long way, roundabout way of answering the solution or coming back to your question, is you also need to look for opportunities elsewhere that will help strengthen us internally. And I really feel that looking beyond South Africa's borders, beyond SADC into the African region, having WHO, AFRO, as a partner is one way of doing that. Internally, I think there is a disconnect between what is done in the medical device innovation space and, as we saw here, in the healthcare delivery space. And that's a serious disconnect that needs to be bridged. And it comes back to the health technology strategy, the health technology framework, health technology policies. We need to look at the full life cycle of health technology and medical devices, not just at the innovation phase, not just at the acquisition or procurement phase, but at the full life cycle. How do we maximize the life cycle of medical devices and health technologies? So unless we do that, we don't understand the game. The game is about outcomes, health outcomes of patients. They can only improve health outcomes if they have access to medical devices and health technologies, the right technology or device at the right time for the right purpose. And so universal health coverage is all about access. And access consists of accessibility, availability, affordability, and acceptability. So what concerns me is that, you know, we are looking at particular very important aspects, but we actually need to step back and look at what we are trying to achieve ultimately. And if we do so, I think we can create a much greater value proposition to politicians, to stakeholders, to say that, you know, we are very important contributor to actually universal health coverage, and we need to do this as a partnership.
So if I may follow that, my recommendation is very straightforward. You know, as a country, we need to decide whether we're going to be focusing on volume or whether we're going to be focusing on quality. And it's a big differentiator to decide, you know, what area or what sector of medical devices and these certification, compliance, standardization relating to that. So we cannot compete by volume to manufacturers like China or China. So our advantage, our strategic advantage would be our quality. I think the South African manufacturers are significantly better off in quality, and which kind of leads to another point around standardization. So we can take our strong proposition as quality, and we ensure quality throughout our processes, and you know, through that we'll be able to differentiate ourselves. And currently, the differentiating factor in the MedTech sector for us is not very clear, and we need to identify that. Which actually leads to our next question in terms of how are we going to be with medium volume, medium tested devices. And we need to have a very clear strategy around how we're going to implement these media quality, this strategies, devices, because this cannot come into play unless we have cross subsidization from various stakeholders, including the private sector. And the third point that I also would like to raise is, we have a lot of R&D potential in this country, and we really need to use that R&D potential. Currently, we're not fully utilizing the R&D potential in the medtech sector. There is a big opportunity for us to venture into that and see the R&D incentive as well as an opportunity to work with the academic space and take that forward. Lastly, it's quite important, as much as we address our own So lastly, I think it's quite important that we need to think beyond Africa to get our volumes, and we need to think beyond Africa to get to be part of the free trade agreement, Africa Free Trade Agreement, to make sure that we have a two-way translation with our current partners like BRICS to have our products to be sold there and their products which are coming here. So we cannot work in isolation. We really need to integrate and work together.
I told you should go to this.
Any comment there?
Lindsay mentioned that this is an industry of small business. I think we must accept that. I think we need to accept that the small business industries is where the growth is going to happen. The large corporates are not growing. So globally, economic growth and job creation is coming from small industries. What I learned in Switzerland, I spent many years there, the industry, and that's a big pharmaceutical industry there. And what I found out is that they drive it from the bottom up, not from the top down. If you say to me, who's the president of Switzerland, I don't think you'll know. The president of South Africa or the US, but Switzerland, you don't know, because they drive everything from the bottom up. Government role is important, but it's not going to be, you've got to come with the solutions and they will endorse it. And I think the solution to South Africa's economic growth is we've got to go from the bottom up and stop complaining about what government at the top is doing. We've got to put solutions. Looking back to myself, we've got to drive it. So from this industry perspective, I think we've got the knowledge, we've got the skill set, we've got to come up with the solutions and then start implementing. But we're going to need government at certain levels to come to the party. I think we can drive it from the bottom up, and that's I would see as a way forward. As far as information and data, in putting the plan together, I found it difficult to find accurate information on this industry. The employers and the companies then have to be far more be able to share what they're doing and what products they've got without giving away trade secrets. But I remember with one of the organizations putting out a questionnaire for information, and they got back 7% of the membership responding to it. It's just not good enough. We need to know. And if you want to talk about collaboration, there has to be more transparency.
Thanks, Vic. I think to your point, I think SALPRO potentially can be a good repository of information to start with. There should be profiling companies, etc., with respect to what categories they operate in. And then over and above, with the regulations coming in, I think there's an opportunity to gather that information of different classes of device, etc. So that for one. But over and above, I want to ask you, Vic, so the expectations are great now that you've done a massive amount of work, and there's massive amount of work to be done with regards to the master plan. Rather than everything disappearing into the mist, do you anticipate having regular feedback sessions to stakeholders to keep them informed, or is it going to be sort of put out in the press? What do you envisage in terms of communication going forward?
Regular interaction. We'll be making ourselves available as the members want us to speak in whatever forum. We'll be available. myself and there'll be others working with me. So we've got to keep this thing alive. We've got to keep the energy levels there. That's part of the communication process. And the ideas that come in, they need to give feedback why we can or can't go with the ideas you put on the table. So we mustn't just listen and walk away. We've got to come back with answers and say, it's fitting to this committee, this process, and these timelines are there. And get feedback. So the communication is going to be so important. As I said, I've gone and looked at the industry and all these, they're coming to a standstill because there's an impasse between government and the private sector. But we promised to do what? You're not coming, no, you're not coming. And so they start pointing fingers, we lose the energy, we lose the relationship. We've got to build relationships around personalities, about leadership, and we've got plenty of that in the MedTech industry. So yes, a regular communication, regular feedback. This can be part of the process.
You just mentioned that about 10 years ago, the National Department of Health established an advisory committee that looked at all aspects that the alternative initiative would have. And it ran for about 2 years, and then the plug was pulled on it by the Deputy Director General at that time. So again, it goes back to the point. If you reinventing the wheel, and actually so much work has already been done in this case. Not sure what I'm not doing on that.
No, South Africa has always excelled in innovative products. From, as you put up in your slides, the first heart transplant, the CT scanner, and many, many, many more. And one of your slides included the highest percentage of innovations in your faculty at the moment is focused on wearables. If we're talking about getting or industrializing the South African medical device landscape, yes, I agree there is a place for heart valves and there's a place for low dose X-ray machines and so on. But those numbers are relatively small. Should the South African medical device manufacturing industry be focusing more on more commodity class A type products, which are currently being imported into South Africa in greater numbers? And here I'm talking about basic things like tongue depressors. I always use tongue depressors as a good example because we're importing simple, basic pieces of timber into South Africa when there is a tremendous amount of timber in this country, and that could create certainly a company for somebody and employment for many, and that's only one item. But we continue to import simple, basic, Class A sterile products, and my proposal would be let's focus on the foundation upon which medical technology is based, and let's build on that to the point that we don't import any of those items from overseas, but we have an industry locally that focuses on just those commodity items as a starter. From there on, we can progress Class B, C, and D. No comment.
Absolutely, Lindsay. I think we need to address the bread and butter stuff. So we really need essentials. So if you were looking at the large volume, large low-risk devices, I think that's a no-brainer. We definitely need to get that going. If you can't get that, the manufacturing sector is almost dead. So we really need to get that up and running. And maybe as part of the exercise, if we know by volume, like which of the products we have are, for example, everybody uses a ECG machine, or every clinic uses an ECG machine, a BP machine, a simple like tongue depressors, measuring cups. These are things that we can actually make in volume in country, and that's not, if we are importing that, that's a crime. Right? So we need to change our mindset to get that sorted out, or get that streamlined, so that anyone who's able to produce the mass volume that we're looking into, we can definitely get that. That's a purely manufacturing problem, innovative manufacturing problem, to get the cost that we can beat with or comparable with our competing Chinese or Taiwanese products. Whereas the other side, the thing that you mentioned about
digital based medical devices, whether we like it or not, the trend is going towards there. And we need to really upskill ourselves to get into that space. One of our biggest challenges during the pandemic was, of course, we weren't able to get chips. There was a global shortage of chips to make medical devices, electronic medical devices. But that's a problem that we as a country cannot solve. Assuming that is streamlined, the basic medical electronic manufacturing center in South Africa is almost non-existent. So we are only talking about passive medical devices in our manufacturing sector. So anything that has electronics, we really need to streamline. There are a few pockets of excellence here and there, but across the board, there is limitations on how much we can produce in terms of volume. I think that also goes to the point that Milagro was talking in terms of digital health. If we really want to strengthen our digital health portfolio and our data, our base in digital health, we need to really get manufacturing of electronics, certified manufacturing of electronics in country. And that's part, otherwise we will only be dealing with mechanical passive devices. And that's not enough for a country like us.
And so I mean, question, and going back to what Vic said earlier, that I mean, government is inefficient in terms of its structure and processes because government departments work in isolation. And there's a huge disconnect between them. So what we need to do, and perhaps the medical device industry can be an instigator of this discussion, is to start from the community level up. So if we look at the West Cape Department of Health, and I don't think that other departments of health, provincial departments are different, about 92% of encounters between patients and the health system and the healthcare system, like the primary level, either the clinic or the CHC. And only 6% go to the next level, to hospital, to the district. Only 2% get to the tertiary academic hospital. And that's a pyramid system, and that's a cost-effective healthcare system. So why I'm saying this is because to answer Lindsay's question in terms of simple technologies, well, at primary level, a lot of the technologies are basic and simple, but they are used in very large amounts. But yet, there's still crucial gaps in availability and their management. And also their evidence as to the impact. So we need to create evidence, going back to what Mark was saying, we need to build a body of evidence that shows the gaps between what is currently in place as to what is needed and the role that the local medical devices can actually play in reducing that gap by identifying the devices that are needed. And again, to do that, tools are available, like the government identifies the medical devices that consumable, even human resources needed for different interventions in different specialties for different levels of care. Here again, this is somewhere we can work in partnership with WHO, whether it's Geneva or
when it comes to where do we start, I think the low-hanging fruit is Class A because of the numbers going there and the not so sophisticated device. So when we put the plan together, it was clear from all parties that category A or Class A is a good place to start. Not ignoring those, but that's where we can make some quicker ground than other areas. The hospital groups is interesting. I met one hospital group, and they said to me they already had identified 19 products that they're importing that they would like to have manufactured locally, but nothing had happened. They found it difficult to engage with the private sector. I don't know why. And so we had the hospital groups talking about it, but there was a disconnect between them and who could do the manufacturing, whether it was a new operation, or whether there were existing operations that could tackle that. That's what we've got to get down to nuts and bolts. We've got to get the hospital groups around the table and identify what can be manufactured without too much difficulty locally and move from there. The other point is the international guys, when I spoke to them, their reluctance to invest further in South Africa for manufacturing was around the volumes. They said, you can't come in and make it viable to bring large sums of money to invest if we don't have the numbers. That's where the African markets became appealing to them, but they need us to open up those African markets. Also, we discussed with them manufacturing component parts for their products, bringing in and if they manufacturing a device in Belgium to make some of the component parts here, that could be part of that. So there's avenues there that we haven't explored that they're prepared to consider if we provide them with certain guarantees. The last thing is the incentives. We don't have incentives for our industry. Saudi Arabia now, we spoke about, Lindsay quoted the Middle East. Saudi Arabia now become the island of, where island is the European go-to place for MedTech. Saudi Arabia is simply going to be that for the Middle East. And the incentives they're providing, the company I went to in Rambo is opening up a company in Saudi Arabia to duplicate what they do here. And the Saudis, the incentives they've given them there and the support, financial support, is phenomenal. We don't have that here. But we've got to find creative ways of incentivizing the industry. So we need to sit down and look at tax breaks or whatever it is that we can do, because government don't have cash to hand out. That's the unfortunate part of the business at the moment. But there are other ways of incentivizing which aren't in place. So we need to find out what are the incentives we can put there for the local manufacturers that are getting made here. Bring down those costs.
We need to wrap this up. I just want to say that everything hinges on sharing information, being open to giving information and receiving information, and working together as a team. Is there anybody there out there that would like to ask a question of the panel? Yes, Mike.
About 2-3 years ago on CNN, they I don't know if the information was verified, but they said that Africa would be the biggest medical consumer outside of America, or medical place for growth. But based on what you guys have said, will we ever get there? You know, how much of that information is true? I mean, me as an entrepreneur, I'm thinking quite excited because the market's going to grow so much. It's exciting for everyone else.
Well, all the studies that we read talk about a 9.5% compounded annual growth rate for medical technology in South Africa. Now, what that is on the rest of the continent, I don't know, but I would imagine it's pretty large. So the signals are positive; they are good. I think we need to, as an industry, work closely with the Department of Trade and Industry, Westgrow, who run export sessions to assist companies like ourselves to get into Africa. Because I think with MDR the way it is and the cost involved and CE mark, et cetera, and the challenges there, it's probably going to be very tough to sell and export into Europe. But I think exporting into Africa is certainly an opportunity for us that we need to exploit. But we need help, and Westgrow certainly can offer that. I'd like to pick on somebody in the audience that is probably the youngest person here, and that is James. James, have you got any comment, having been in this industry, you're currently doing your master's, give us some indication from a young perspective, where you see the challenges or what you see as opportunities or solutions.
Skills. Anyone hear me?
Yeah.
You mentioned that skills was something that we had a lot of, which I think you are from my opinion, but I think at least from a young person's perspective, keeping those skills there has been a bit of an issue. In this industry particularly, overseas is generally where everyone wants to go. So everyone in my age group, which is generally, I think, from a company perspective, doing a lot of the groundwork, everyone's leaving all the time. And I think that hinders progress a lot. So in terms of skills, yes, there's a lot of them. But how do we keep the skills here, especially from a career perspective?
I should change the So it's the brain issue, technical brain issue. It's a massive thing, and we see it in our university as well. If we get good graduates, they're being plucked while they're doing their master's or postgraduate degree to this industry. While they're also in the en route to go overseas. This is an ongoing thing. And when we brief discussion with them, a lot of things actually makes them make the decision, right? One is about the political climate, the stability aspect, which we have no control. So, our local industry is not able to afford to pay them the salaries that the overseas industries are able to pay, even remotely working. They say a simple design engineer job, what we are able to pay as an entry-level designer job in medical devices sector. The overseas industries are giving them at least 150% more of that salary in dollars and euros. And that seems to be more attractive to younger generations. And I think, there are a few passionate innovators in the last row you can see here, so who stay back in the industry because they want to make a difference in the country. But unless you make the market more lucrative, it is not going to be sustainable, right? We can create all the good industry to come into play, but we also need to improve our pay mastery at some point or the other. There's no other way we can actually gain these skills because the skills will specialized and it's of titles.
I'll start on the skills one first. Yes, we need to watch the skills, but we need to look at more creative ways of dealing with it. I spent the last 10 years in Europe. And let me tell you, in Switzerland, with the high technology they've got, those young guys want to come have a safari like tomorrow. They've had enough of Europe and its issues. They want to come here and they'll work here for the salaries that we're paying, because it's not about money for them. There's a whole new mindset that is coming out from Europe's young people. And the challenge is we don't allow them to come here. So if we've got a shortage of skills, we've got to change the whole skills dynamic in this country to allow that shortage of skills to come in from the other way around, the brain drain, pulling the guys here. We've got this mindset in South Africa. I've got 4 sons, 2 of them are sitting overseas, qualified here and they'll be recruited. But they're talking about coming back now that they've experienced and their chances over there. But I still think there's creative ways of dealing with that. But at the moment, we've got adequate skills to deal with any immediate growth. And I asked the one guy with respect, I don't want to mention the name, how do you keep your skills? And he's got highly technical skills. I get them from varsity, I grow them, I create a culture. They don't want to leave my company because of what I'm offering. And so we create the right space and culture. We're going to keep the guys there. But you're right, it's a challenge that we've got to apply in mind. When it comes to Africa, it's not such an easy one. Because if you look at what Trump has just done with USA and the money that comes in, so many of these donor agencies, they provide. Africa thrives on donor agencies. And so the market is huge, but they don't pay. So you go anywhere in Africa, you can get your medical devices in, they don't pay. So you're going to have to find a way of linking to other forms of payment to foreign donors for the short term, while the economies of those countries get in a position to be able to afford to pay. So everyone will want what it's got. You're going to sit with a problem that they don't have. And that's the Africa problem over and over again. And the guys that have been successful in Eastern Africa are the guys that link into these foreign donor agencies, the Europe, the Asia, and the US. And those are the guys who are paying for the medical devices, the hospitals, and all that kind of stuff. So there's definitely a way to go. But if we rely on the African countries themselves to pay, you've got a problem.
I come back to what I was saying earlier about collaborating with our African colleagues and African institutions. And I think part of the answer to James's question is actually colleagues in Africa. We've got people from African countries flooding down into South Africa, flooding down into the Western Cape. Why don't we attract medical device or technology entrepreneurs from other countries? Why don't we set up, to Vic's point about manufacturing parts here, why don't we set up an Airbus type model for manufacture in Africa, where various components of the system can be manufactured in different countries at the respective centers of excellence with specific skills for that component. So I think, Africa is the only continent in the world that's got a young population. And we need to tap that fantastic resource. We can actually serve as an instigator, catalyst for doing that. and with a focus on not only medical device and technology innovation, but health-related technology in a broader sense. So I'm very upbeat and optimistic that we actually need to work with colleagues and form those partnerships and establish the ecosystem that will enable that and sustain that.
Thanks very much indeed. I've heard a lot of positivity here today. Everybody seems to be upbeat. I think there are massive opportunities for local manufacturers in this country. I think the MedTech Masterplan is certainly going to open up a lot of doors and opportunities for local manufacturers and investors in this industry. I know that there are individuals looking to procure medical device manufacturer companies in South Africa. So there is a focus on our industry. I think the challenge that we face is to get government on board to understand the challenges, to work with us through Vic. I think Vic is going to be the conduit to assisting us in facing some of the challenges head on, but he can be the bouncing board between us and Treasury, us and the National Department of Health, us and the DTI. One of the issues which I saw on the presentation was funding. So quality, regulatory, and funding seem to be the two big issues. An industry organization like this is there to support its members. And, you know, with a partner like Wesgrow, we and the Department of Trade and Industry, we endeavor to try and assist members to obtain those quality and regulatory requirements. And we certainly can network with individuals to assist local manufacturers, particularly startups, to get themselves SAHPRA registered and so on. So I think let's agree to keep in touch with each other. We're going to update our website in the very near future, and there'll be a lot of information on there. May we have these gentlemen's presentations to put on the web? Thank you very much indeed. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much to this group of speakers and panelists. And on behalf of the cluster, we'd like to give you a small gift. It's the very latest aftershake. Underarm spray.
This is very appropriate technology.
And I'd like to call down Samantha and Luca, who have been instrumental in putting the day together. And I'd like to thank them personally. And I know they don't need any perfume, so we've got something for them. Thank you, Samantha, for all your effort. Thank you very much.
We also have some speakers. Vic, back to getting your aftershave.
Wow, thank you very much. Appreciate it. If the lunch is served, I think it's called the Mac Club.
We will show you. It's just
Lunka is going to show us directions. Great. Look forward to chatting and networking over lunch. Thank you very much indeed.
things.